Kokomi is finally out and there's a lot of surprising things about her, so this video is all about finding out just how good she is in today's Genshin Impact. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by CodeAtma, a new mobile RPG that features a modern supernatural fantasy setting. There's a secret war happening where a special organization called the Asterisk enlists powerful agents called Seekers who use a special app called CodeAtma to summon mythical beings to help them win this war. But the twist here is who you're fighting. It's the same Atma that are causing havoc and destruction, so there's no better way to do this than pitting these powerful beings against each other. And there's hundreds of different Atma for you to collect, each with their own backstory and purpose. Some have dethroned kings, others broke the gates of heaven, and you can make strategic gameplay choices with each new powerful being you unlock, from creating strong formations to equipping them with various weapons and armor. The game focuses on delivering expansive universe while encouraging exploration, and you can easily play this as your second game when you're preoccupied with something else. And you can check out the game right now by using the link in the description, and by doing so, you'll be supporting the channel and helping out with future videos. So make sure to check out CodeAtma today. Right from the start, you can tell Kokomi is pretty simple in terms of mechanics, but there are a few caveats. First of all, her elemental skill and burst both provide healing, and from a lot of testing, it seems like the workload of heals is shared between them, but it is important to understand that only the burst will regenerate the health to the whole party, while an active character must stay within the field of the jellyfish in order to benefit from the healing. Now, the companion you summon is pretty decent. It doesn't cover a wide area like Albedo's flower, but at least it provides three things: Hydro replication every 2 seconds, a low amount of damage that becomes somewhat moderate during burst mode, and of course, the healing itself. As for the elemental particles, it varies on how often enemies get hit, and it is kind of random, but the biggest amount that's been observed within a single duration was 5 hydro particles, which isn't a lot to be honest, especially considering during that time she will most likely be off-field, so she gets even less energy. However, one of her passive talents does actually reset the cooldown when she goes into burst mode, but you need to have an active jellyfish on the field. Still, this cooldown refresh does compensate for lack of hydro uptime you would otherwise need to get with a freeze team, which we'll get into more in the next segment. But keep in mind, while you can refresh the jellyfish, if you decide to exit out of her burst immediately in order to start causing freeze reactions with someone else, you will be forfeiting her burst because it deactivates after switching out. Which brings us to her biggest selling point, the burst mode. Now, besides reenacting biblical events, Kokomi's attacks get boosted by a percentage of her maximum health, which furthermore gets increased from another passive talent that takes 15% of healing bonus and, well, unsurprisingly, makes all of her attacks even stronger. The overall damage is quite noticeable, although due to her last and most controversial talent, which gives her a negative 100% crit rate in exchange for 25% healing bonus, you will never see her produce big critical hits. It's also important to note that unlike Raiden's Shogun, she doesn't get separate damage multipliers for her normal charged and plunge attacks during her burst, which means you are going to need to level her regular normal attacks talent if you want to maximize her sub-damage dealer role. So with all of these caveats out of the way, it's clear that this Watatsumi Island Priestess isn't your typical healer, and while the damage isn't going to be jaw-dropping, there is comfort to be found in consistency thanks to her lack of critical stats. So looking at her sole performance isn't much of an indicator, which is why this next segment is all about her team building and equipment potential. One of the best things about Kokomi is her equipment selection. The 3 main weapons that were tested was her signature catalyst, the Everlasting Moonglow, then Prototype Amber, which you can get from the blacksmith, and finally, Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayers. When compared side by side at her peak potential, which is the burst mode, the differences in damage aren't that big aside from her signature weapon, which means it's all about focusing on the passive that suits your playstyle the best. So if you feel like her energy generation is lacking, using Prototype Amber could be a great solution, but if you want to benefit from an attack boost when switching her out, then the Dragon Slayer's Catalyst offers a chunky upgrade, although its usefulness might depend on the rotation, since you want to switch to someone who can take advantage of the whole buff's duration. Lastly, while her Moonglow Catalyst offers a variety of nice little perks from the passive and has the best base attack and substat compared to the other 2 weapons, the difference doesn't feel that drastic when compared to previous Engulfing Lightning banner, so you should definitely not feel pressured to pull on this weapon, and in fact, there's even more alternative options like the new Inazuma Craftable, which works pretty decently with Electrocharge Team, or even your good old-fashioned Favonius Codex to help her with energy regen. Now, for the current build used in showcasing her, Heart of Depth 4-piece set was used to maximize her burst mode, but there are other options, like running a split 2 set between Maiden's Beloved and Heart of Depth, or even going all in into Tenacity of Millilith if you want to turn her into more of an off-field damage booster. It really depends on your needs, but make sure to consider the resin cost efficiency, so if you don't have any of these sets, then it's probably the best idea to farm the domain, which has both artifact sets you can use for your characters. But if you're a whale, well, you know this doesn't apply to you. Now, as for the team compositions that were tested, hands down the best one, at least from the initial impressions, was a Taser team. There's plenty of variations you can go for, but the core of the team has to have at least one Electro and one Animo character, with the latter usually being Sucrose because her crowd control and elemental mastery boost helps with overall damage performance, while Electro can be anyone ranging from Beto to Fischl to even Raiden, since Kokomi's 70 energy cost does actually play well with Raiden's resolve mechanic. The other team that did pretty well was Freeze, although when she's off the field, the fighting needs to happen inside the jellyfish area, otherwise you won't be freezing anyone without the assistance from characters like Venti, Kazuha, or Sucrose, who can spread the Hydro status efficiently. It's definitely not as easy to handle as Taser comp, where you can basically just go ham on everyone and don't care too much about rotating characters in the right order, but with Freeze, those jellyfishes need to be positioned at the right place and time. Now, when we talk about Freeze, one team that comes to mind is Morgana, and over the past few months, due to introduction of Ayaka and Kazuha, there's been quite a few alternative options to run it, and you can definitely use Kokomi here instead of Mona, which is especially great if you don't own the Astrologist. Otherwise, they both have their pros and cons, like you get healing, but in exchange for that, you lose out on the Omen buff, and while the jellyfish remains on the field for a longer time, Mona's skill applies Hydro faster and also taunts enemies, so it really comes down to your own personal preference. Finally, since in the newest Abyss cycle, Floor 11 deals corrosive damage, and this is where Kokomi truly shines, serving a niche purpose, but keep in mind her healing wasn't that significant when compared to other healers, which kind of makes sense because she can also act as a temporary damage dealer in her burst mode, so you will be able to shave off some time in these runs thanks to her consistent damage output, but if you already have characters like Bennett and Jean invested into, then you're probably not missing out on much. All in all, in terms of overall team performance, Kokomi can be easily decked out with free-to-play weapons and to some extent artifacts, which do not have critical stats other characters need, while at the same time she serves multiple roles, not standing out too much in any of them, but providing consistent enough performance. It also helps a lot she's from the Hydro element, so integrating her into teams is quite easy. It's almost been a year since Genshin is out, and the initial roster of characters has nearly doubled in size, so when someone like Kokomi comes out, it's almost impossible not to draw some comparisons against other existing characters. Now, the first thing a lot of you are probably wondering, is she better than Barbara? Well, the answer is more or less yes, but let's be honest here. While Barbara can heal just as well as Kokomi, the biggest difference between them is that Barbara cannot act as your sub-damage dealer or even have a decent deployable skill on the field. You could put resources into her and maximize some damage during her elemental skill, but it's not exactly efficient, so in terms of roles, Kokomi is definitely richer in that aspect. The other big thing is the difference between their wet application. While Kokomi only self-inflicts herself once after casting the skill, with Barbara, this is a continuous effect that repeats once in a while and can get really annoying when going up against cryo enemies. Like, obviously, you can cleanse yourself with a wet status, but this niche purpose hasn't been relevant for a while now, and when we talk about roles, the most important one everyone is concerned about is her potential as a sub-damage dealer, since she's basically like Raiden's Shogun, except instead of acting as an energy recharge battery, you get a healing, but both of their damage potential lies in their burst mode, so building around it is pretty much what you want to do. And while her damage from the burst is good enough, one thing that's kind of missing is some decent AoE damage, because just like with the other catalysts, the stamina cost for a charged attack is pretty hefty, and there's no way to mitigate this cost, so most of the time, you'll be using normal attacks to quickly dish out the damage, while the jellyfish does its own thing, and this means in a vacuum, her potential damage against multiple enemies is pretty low. And before you bring up the fact her normal attacks deal splash damage, the enemies have to be very close to each other, so without an animo user or really good positioning, this feature isn't that relevant. But the keyword was vacuum because in a team with characters like Beidou and Xiangling, or basically anyone that can deploy their abilities, will work really well, especially considering the fact it's so easy to spread electrocharge reactions with Kokomi thanks to her constant hydro attacks, so you'll see a lot of numbers flying out in team comps like Taser. Finally, a quick glance at her constellations reveals that MiHoYo isn't trying to bait the lower spenders this time around, unlike with Raiden Shogun, because the best abilities only start from the third constellation, so upgrades like extra levels for her burst or gaining energy and additional attack speed from the C4 are nice, while the final constellation just doesn't beat the bush around anymore and just gives her a whopping 40% hydro damage bonus. This is honestly fine because the whales still need to see big attack numbers, and anyone dropping on this character more than $1,000 should expect a drastic increase in her damage output. It's kind of hard to put Kokomi into one of the category boxes and just call it a day, because she's clearly designed to serve a lot of different needs, and the best way to describe her would be a hydro version of Jean with a pinch of Raiden Shogun added into the mix. Overall, what's definitely great about Kokomi is that she can perform multiple roles just like you would expect from a competent healer, which is great because just keeping the team alive isn't the only thing you need to worry about in time trial challenges. The other awesome thing about her is the selection of really good free-to-play weapons like Prototype Amber and Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayers, not to mention the artifacts, which we've considered to be mostly experienced fodder in the past, can now be used instead to build her as a damage dealer. But because she strays so far away from the traditional character design, even if she can do multiple roles, she doesn't excel at any of them, which is to be expected of, but it kind of makes you wonder if it was really worth taking away the critical rate from her, since the other drawback would be her own lack of AoE damage, which the jellyfish isn't good for because the real purpose of it is to heal and apply hydro to enemies, while her charged attack, as with every other catalyst, is extremely costly and leaves you exposed to enemy attacks when the stamina bar runs out. Still, the biggest selling point she can offer has to be the hydro element itself that works so well with many different team comps, and if you're truly missing out on a semi-offensive healer with a fun burst mode, then she may be for you. However, at the end of the day, make sure you first appreciate the actual playstyle and design before you decide to wish on someone. Hope you enjoyed this video. One thing to keep in mind if you're still on the fence about Kokomi would be to first wait and see what the next characters are going to be, especially since the special anniversary livestream is coming up where we might learn more about the future banners. So as always, with every second character that comes out during an update, it's more or less a waiting game for those who want to be careful about spending their primo gems. And if you haven't done already, make sure to subscribe to this channel and gently press the like button. Thanks for watching and see you soon.